Welcome to Talking in a Time of Uncertainty. I'm your host, Lucas Dodson, and I'm alongside Melanie Moore. For those that may not know Melanie, she's the Executive Director of the Golden State Warriors Community Foundation and the Warriors VP of Community Relations. Melanie graduated from Yale University with a bachelor's in psychology and received her PhD in child and adolescent development at Stanford University. She spent 3 years as the Director of Evaluation at Team Up for Youth, an intermediary organization focused on expanding opportunities for youth sports. She then was the owner of Sea Change Incorporated, which worked with nonprofit organizations to build strategies to achieve impact. She spent the next 2 years as a managing partner for the Family Independence Initiative, and from 2015 to 2019, served as the director for All In Alameda County, an organization working to fight poverty in Alameda County. This experience all led up to her current position with the Golden State Warriors, which she started in March 2019. And Melanie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Warriors Foundation's biggest fundraiser, the annual poker tournament, took place in one of your first few days in the job. Is that right?
That's right. I think it was day 5 of when I started in 2019. That's right. Yeah.
You really just hit the ground running.
Exactly. And fortunately, I didn't have to do much other than show up to that event because there was so much planning that had gone into it. But I had just gotten there, so it had all been kind of laid out. I just got to enjoy.
Did you feel like any sort of uncertainty going into it? You know, you have all the players there, all the ownership, and pretty much all like the head honchos of the Warriors, and that's your foundation's event right there. Was there any sort of uncertainty going into it?
Oh, absolutely. Starting with, well, what am I supposed to wear to this event? But not knowing a lot of people, not knowing the relationships that our staff had with the leadership and the ownership of our team. So trying to understand or learn what my role was going to be that evening, all of that was very new. I did definitely a lot of watching, sort of standing around watching. I met a lot of our board members that night for the first time. And that was wonderful. They were so warm and welcomed me very warmly, one of whom I believe you know, Jessica Dodson. That was my first time meeting Jessica and many others on the board. So I was definitely put at ease by how warm everybody was. But it was a night to remember just because I was taking it all in.
Yeah, definitely. Like I can only imagine what that feels like, just going in, hitting the ground running right there. It's such a big event, but obviously you handled it well. And on the topic of uncertainty, the Warriors Community Foundation supports and does so much work to help Bay Area youth with uncertain futures. And you have worked helping people facing uncertainty all throughout your career in all steps of it. So could you talk on how uncertainty has shaped your career and what you do?
Absolutely. But I have to start and say, Lucas, I feel like all of us face uncertainty all the time. I think it's probably a misnomer or a myth that we can predict the next step or our futures or how things are going to turn out. And I think as humans, I think the way our brains are wired is we seek certainty, we seek clarity, and because it sure makes us more able to relax. If you know that saber-toothed tiger is not about to attack you, then you can relax and have a nap or have a meal. And so I think we're hardwired to sort of look for protection and certainty because it's literally protecting us. And I think as I've lived my own life and certainly worked with many others across the course of my career, I've just seen countless examples of best laid plans going left, going right, all of a sudden changing, and people having to adapt. So I think that it's important to just always hold that perspective. A great quote, I believe it was Dwight Eisenhower, who said, "Planning is essential, but plans are useless." And when I heard that quote, I wrote it down because it's totally the story of my life. I love to plan. I'm a planner. I will sit there with an Excel spreadsheet and map out January, February, March, April, and then all the activities that I want to, all the goals I have and what I want to accomplish that year. I'm a financial planner for my family. I want to make sure we're on track. And all the time, I'll spend, hours planning, and then one thing will change, and I have to go back and revise all those plans. But the reason I still plan, the reason I don't just kind of throw it out the window and say, oh, well, you can't predict anything, is because going back and having established that goal and understanding where I want to be allows me to adapt the plan much more quickly. If it is true that if you don't know where you're headed, any road will take you there. So if I know where I'm headed, then I can adjust and adapt.
Yeah.
But I don't for a minute pretend that change is not the constant. It is.
Yeah. So would you find that change and uncertainty are pretty synonymous in terms of like one's career path, and that change is always going to be scary, you know? Change is always uncertain because new beginnings definitely come with new faces, new opportunities, and just new experiences. So how would you say this uncertainty though has differed through the different like lenses that you've looked through in your career? You know, you worked with All In, which fought poverty. You know, and that experience with uncertainty is definitely a lot different from some uncertainty that you'll see within your own family or within other members of the staff on the Warriors. So could you elaborate a little bit on how you see it differently throughout your career?
Absolutely. Um, I will start by telling a story of a young woman that I met when I was in college, and when I was an undergrad. My work study job was at a nonprofit that had been started by another Yale student many generations before. It was an organization called the Ulysses S. Grant Foundation, and it was an after school and summer tutoring and education program for students in New Haven. New Haven is a pretty low income community, and Yale is a very wealthy organization. And there's a little bit of tension there. There always has been. This Ulysses S. Grant Foundation was actually founded by the grandnephew of Ulysses S. Grant, who also, I believe, went to Yale. I might be mistaken about that. But this Yale student, who was the grandnephew, started this program as a way to give back to the community, as a way to say he wanted to help create pathways for students in New Haven to actually get to Yale, because he thought, look, this is a great educational institution in this community. We ought to be not just bringing students from other cities and other communities, but we ought to have students from New Haven who grow up here coming to Yale as well. And so it was a great opportunity to get to know students whose backgrounds were different from my own. And it was a huge eye opener when this young woman who was 13, I was probably 20 at the time, she came to me and she was one of the students in the program, and she said she wanted to be a doctor. And I said, oh, great, I can help you with that. I understand that process because, you know, a lot of my fellow students want to be doctors, and students I went to high school with want to be doctors. So here's what you do. In high school, you sign up for all the AP science classes. It's really good if you get on the math track so that you can take calculus BC by the time you finish. And I kept talking, and I realized she's looking at me with this blank stare. And I stopped and I was like, what's wrong? She said, what's an AP? And it was a stark moment where I realized that, first of all, I was coming from a completely different life experience than she was. And it was when I understood what educational equity was all about, even though I probably didn't have those words for it at that time. And it was when I realized that the certainty that I was laying out for her, the path that had worked for my peers and, you know, could work for me if I wanted to follow that path, was simply not available to her. So instantly, the idea of a pivot became something that I needed to understand how to do. How could I help this young woman? It required me to change the way that I approached that job of sort of getting to medical school, and understanding her situation. So it wasn't possible for me to create AP classes in her high school. It wasn't possible for me to take her from the high school where she was attending and put her in a different high school situation where they might have APs. So what was the workaround? And how was I going to engage her and maybe engage her family in designing that workaround? I'll tell you the end of the story because I'm sure everybody's wondering, well, did she become a doctor? She ended up attending community college in New Haven, and she became a pharmacy technician and has worked in the medical field at the VA hospital and also at Yale New Haven Hospital for many, many years. And I'm still in touch. I won't, it's been many, many years. She's in her 40s now. And so she was able to build a career in the medical field. But it wasn't exactly the career she started out imagining, but she's actually been, I think, really satisfied and happy with her choices. So just because you start out down one road doesn't mean you're going to go down that exact road. There are twists and turns. There are barriers, there are obstacles, there are things you got to jump over. And sometimes that you change your mind as well. And maybe becoming a doctor wasn't the true goal, but just working in the medical field, working at a hospital was the goal. And she was able to get there. So I offer that as an example of the kinds of uncertainty that the young people that I've worked with over the years may face. Just the uncertainty of how to get to a goal that isn't something you've ever seen anyone accomplish around you.
Yeah. And you having this realization that educational equity is such a problem, like in this story specifically. And this was pretty early on, you said, right? Early on your, I guess, development.
I was still an undergraduate, yeah.
Yeah. So how would you say that realization shaped your career? Because so much of the work you've done has to do with educational equity.
Absolutely. It made me passionate about trying to fix situations like that, trying to bring more educational equity into the world. My dad actually had the great opportunity to work for Senator Robert Kennedy when my dad was a young man. He grew up in rural Oklahoma, and he won a contest, and he got to have an internship year in Washington, D.C., and he got placed in Senator Kennedy's office. He didn't even choose Senator Kennedy. It was sort of the luck of the draw. Well, what an incredible, lucky stroke for him. And so he got to spend time with one of the greatest leaders of our country, and of course, all of the people also working for Senator Kennedy at the time, and learned from all those people. He then returned to Oklahoma, became an adult, and went to college, and eventually became my dad. And he would say to me just about every day when he would come home from work, he would say, "Hey, Mel, what did you do for the good of the cause today?" And I didn't know what that meant. What do you mean? What's the good of the cause? I went to school, I read a book, but over time I understood that there's a purpose beyond my self-interest. There's a purpose beyond me getting to my next goal, and it really is about service. So I think that foundation was already there by the time I met this young woman when I was an undergrad. And then when I understood, okay, this is a problem that maybe I could not solve, but this is a problem I could spend my work time addressing. This is a way that I can be of service. This is a way I can be useful. It was easy for me to sort of pick up that banner and run with it. And so I decided pretty early on that I wanted to study education. I ended up getting my doctorate in education, and looked very much at issues of how do youth development organizations, programs like the one that I worked in at Yale, how do those nonprofit organizations that support young people help them achieve their educational goals? So from the earliest days, I was focused on the nonprofits that support schools to help kids get better educational outcomes. And interestingly, that's what we do at the Warriors Community Foundation. So all of this talk is about uncertainty. I could never have predicted that I would end up working at the Warriors Community Foundation if you had talked to me when I was 20. Yet there have been some consistent themes throughout my career. And so if you look backwards, it all makes perfect sense. Predicting forwards is always harder. So it's not a fail-safe, because people do change their minds and people will learn new things that will cause them to change their perspective. But I do feel like all of us have core values, core beliefs that we have when we're in high school, that we have when we're in college, that evolve based on experience, but that do present a through line. They present an opportunity to be true to oneself. And I think anybody who's starting out should really look for those truths inside yourself. Look for those experiences you have when you're interacting with others in the world that really speak to you in the way that this experience with this young woman in New Haven spoke to me, because it might just be the turn you take on your path that points you in the direction of your career.
For sure, for sure. And speaking of that path you took to your career, and you said you couldn't see yourself with the Warriors if you were like in your 20s, but were you much of a basketball fan when you were growing up?
Well, yes, I was. I was definitely a basketball fan. Starting when I was very young, I grew up in New Orleans. And so my dad used to take me to New Orleans Jazz games. Probably you don't realize, Lucas, that it was not always the Utah Jazz. It was started out as the New
No,
Orleans.
oh, yeah.
Okay. And so I went to my first games there. And then I have to admit, and it's funny having just watched the documentary series The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the story of the Bulls and their great success. In the early 90s, I graduated college in 1990. And in the early 90s, I was a huge New York Knicks fan. And maybe it was because I went to school in New Haven and it was close to New York. I don't know, but the Knicks were my team.
Mhm.
And so I couldn't like Michael Jordan and the Bulls. In fact, I hated the Bulls. They were the
Right,
rival, right? They were the team that we had to beat.
of course.
So I was a huge basketball fan. And then coming to the Bay Area, I became a Warriors fan. And that's they're my team. They're my team for forevermore.
Yeah, so like it was pretty much a marriage of your interests right there.
Yeah,
You get like
absolutely.
your personal interests mixed with your work interests all perfectly in harmony. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
So how do you use your previous work experience to your advantage in your work with the Warriors?
I think understanding the core goal of the nonprofits that we fund at the Warriors Community Foundation is very important. I really know what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to correct the same educational inequity that I wanted to correct when I was a young woman. I think too, understanding after all these years of working with organizations like that, the challenges that they go through, the challenges around raising enough money, the challenges of maintaining high quality staff, especially in an expensive community like the Bay Area, the challenges of working with the young people, some of whom experience success, but others experience real challenge and maybe drop out of the program. Um, and just the challenges of um, managing an organization. Having run a company when I was running my evaluation firm, I understand that well. It's, you're not super happy at the end of every day. Not every day is rosy and shiny and the way you wanted it to turn out. And there are lots of days when you do have to pivot and be resilient. So these nonprofit organizations that we work with, they go through all those highs and lows. Um, but I feel a particular sense of kinship with them because of I think our shared goal to help young people do better.
Yeah. And that seems like the shared goal interests has been so consistent throughout your career. You know, you've worked in so many situations with organizations that are aiming to help out nonprofits. And I think that really has translated well to your work with the Warriors. And would you say that work with Sea Change Incorporated, the how would you describe it, as a partnership organization? What's the best?
Well, we were a consulting organization, so we would get hired by nonprofits and by foundations to come in and do research about the effectiveness of the nonprofits work. So
Mhm.
let's say a foundation like the Warriors gives $50,000 to the Boys and Girls Club, and they wonder, what did we get as a result of that? What difference was made in the lives of young people or in a community as a result of our $50,000 investment, or taken over time, as the result of the work of the Boys and Girls Club for the last 10 years,
Mhm.
5 years. And so firms like mine, like Sea Change, actually get hired to come in and do those studies. Some of it's quantitative. You can do surveys, you can look back at kids' grades, you can look at all types of metrics to understand the success of a program. You can also gather stories. And so qualitative research is also really important because you want to understand from a personal standpoint, how did a program affect a young person?
Yeah.
Or if you're gathering lots of different stories, you understand the particular secret sauce of that nonprofit nonprofit? Why is it effective? And stories can help you learn that. So that's what we did at Sea Change.
For sure. And with Sea Change, how did that managing experience and being, kind of overseeing the rest of that group, how did that translate to your work with the Warriors and, being the executive director?
Definitely the opportunity to manage a team, and having had that experience with Sea Change, building the consultancy from one person, myself, to a team of about 9 of us over many years, put me in a position of sort of having understood what it is to manage a team, manage to a budget, make payroll every month. Those are things that somebody running an organization has to do. We had to think through human resources issues, like, are we going to offer healthcare benefits? Are we going to offer maternity leave? We were a very small company, and so smaller companies aren't regulated in the way that larger companies are. So as a leader, I had to make some of those choices, and wanted to make those choices based on my value system. And obviously, I had to balance that against the bottom line. So those experiences prepared me to work in a situation where at the Warriors, where I'm leading a team, we're making decisions about allocating resources. We're having to make sure we're taking care of our workers at the same time. So a lot of the same practices come into play at the Warriors as when I was running my own company, just in a much larger scale.
Yeah. But do you have, because the Warriors are such a large corporation, I guess, I mean, they're a basketball team, but they're really a corporation. Do you have to worry about those same things, like deciding whether they get maternity leave and all that? Because I assume that's all taken care of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those types of choices are certainly made by our human resources department and our overarching leadership and ownership. Absolutely. And because we are a larger organization, there are a lot more regulations from the state and the feds that come into play. Yeah. But I still am supervising a group of human beings, all of whom have very unique needs. And as a manager, people bring you everything. So they bring you everything from I'm sick today to I'm planning my vacation to I'm having a conflict with somebody I'm working with, and I need help getting through it. So much as you might think about the way a teacher manages a classroom, it's not just the job of standing up and teaching content. There's all of those human beings and the basic relationships and needs, and I think that's all part of being a manager as well.
Yeah, no, that totally is. And do you see this as the final stop in your career journey, or do you have a different line of work or different, interest in your future plans?
Such a great question. I've always thought that running a flower shop would be wonderful, but that's just because I love flowers. I don't think that'll be my final career stop. So I love philanthropy, and I love basketball, as we've established. So I think this is a perfect match in a lot of ways for my passions. And I would love to stay with the Warriors Community Foundation for a long time. I think at core, the idea of working in a space where I can help nonprofit organizations that are working with young people is definitely the right lane for me to be in. Doing direct service work with young people is something I explored briefly. It's probably not the right lane for me because, frankly, I get too invested in the individual young person. And my mom actually was a clinical psychologist, so that's what she did. She was a therapist, and she would have these intense one-on-one, conversations and a supportive relationship with a lot of individuals. And that's the kind of change that she wanted to make in the world, the contribution that she felt comfortable with. That was her lane. My lane, I think, needs to be more at the organizational level. I'm less, I will take less of the work home if I'm working with an organization than if I'm working with an individual young person. And I probably couldn't go to sleep at night if I was thinking about all of the challenges in a single person's life. But if I think about it at the level of an organization, that I can manage. So I think it's the right fit where I am, and to be working for the Warriors just makes it incredibly fun.
Yeah, obviously. I feel like there are so many extra perks to make you take your mind off of work a little bit and get to enjoy that personal passion of basketball. So that's definitely an awesome fit. And speaking on the future and on that topic, does you know the class of 2020 are some of many, many people that are facing an uncertain future right now as we, the class of 2020, enter the first phase of our adult life, which is college, or gap year or work, whatever path people may take. And is there any advice that you would like to share with the members of class in 2020, or actually anyone who's entering a big phase into their life? Because I know you have a daughter who's entering high school next year. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I was thinking about this, and I think there are two things that I would offer as not polar opposites, but sort of two poles, if you will, or maybe an idea of a yin and a yang. And one is the idea of uncertainty and the idea that change is the constant, that there will always be unpredictability. And the other pillar or idea is certainty and the fact that in times of great chaos, there will always be certain things that are standing still. It may not appear that way. It may not seem obvious, but they're always there. And it can be very reassuring to in if you're feeling uncertain, if you're feeling overwhelmed by too many choices or the lack of knowledge, you can't take the next step until you find out about this other thing, and so you're stuck. If you remind yourself of those things that you do know are true. So I was thinking about, well, what are they? If I had to name three things that I know are absolutely true, um, I would say, let me start with gravity. Gravity's real. It's true. It's a certain thing. Now you probably studied quantum physics, and so you're going to tell me that that's not true. But setting theoretical math and quantum physics aside, gravity is a constant. It's true that the sun will come up tomorrow, barring some astrological disaster. So it's one of those things we can count on. And I think in times of stress or uncertainty, if we can start to enumerate the things that we know are true, it can be reassuring. But just looking for external reassurance is not sufficient, because we have to bring our own mojo to the situation. And so that's where embracing uncertainty is important. And I think we can embrace uncertainty by remembering we're resilient. We have the capacity as humans to think creatively, to act decisively, and to be proactive about addressing whatever situation we find ourselves in. So at the end of the day, I think we can be reassured that some things are just always true. Maybe for some people, that's the love of family. Maybe it is your home. Maybe it is your faith. But then there's always ways that we have to step up and find our internal creativity to sort of rise and meet the challenge of unpredictability. I think the class of 2020 is actually going to be incredibly well positioned going forward to become leaders, because you all have had to navigate this time of great uncertainty. So you are having to be nimble. You're having to figure stuff out. You're having to recreate and reinvent. And all of those experiences are going to add up to you guys just being awesome leaders in organizations. And you're going to be creatives in the field of music and art and performance. You're going to be empathetic in ways that other generations haven't had to think about, because you're having to figure out how to reach out and build relationships through distance. So don't look at this time as a negative. Look at it as a building block of who you all are in the process of becoming.
Sure. Well, that's great advice. Thank you, Melanie, very much for your time, for your wisdom, for your expertise, and your insight into uncertainty and the whole topic around it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas. It's awesome that you're doing these conversations. I'm happy to be part of it.
Of course.